Hello, welcome to Phantom Homicide.
And welcome. Today, we're diving deep into a story that, honestly, it proves historical fact can be way more gripping, more terrifying than any thriller novel.
We're talking about the Dreyfus affair.
Exactly. It's this tangled web of espionage, deep-seated corruption within an institution, and the absolute, calculated betrayal of a soldier who dedicated his life to his country. A betrayal that, over 12 incredibly long years, came dangerously close to tearing the French Republic completely apart.
Yeah, this isn't just some dusty old history lesson we're talking about. The sources we've dug into, they paint a picture of a truly chilling true crime. It's almost like a blueprint, isn't it? Showing how easily prejudice, political and religious, can just fester and then be used to weaponize the highest levels of state power.
That's the core of it.
Yeah.
So our mission here in this deep dive is to meticulously trace all those plot threads. We're looking at the intercepted notes, the secret backroom trials, the absolutely shocking forgery.
The mysterious deaths that conveniently pop up.
Right. And crucially, the handful of courageous people who risked absolutely everything, their reputations, their freedom, even their lives, to try and unearth the truth that was buried under this mountain, this avalanche of official lies.
Okay, so before we get into the weeds, set the scene for us. What was France like in 1894? What's the backdrop to this explosion?
Well, you absolutely have to understand the geopolitical climate. France in 1894 was still living in the shadow of this massive national humiliation.
The Franco-Prussian War.
Precisely. Only 23 years earlier. And that war wasn't just a military defeat. It toppled the Second Empire, led to the unification of Germany as the Second Reich, and France lost Alsace and Lorraine as these really key border regions. It was a deep wound.
So even though there was technically peace between the new French Third Republic and Germany, the mood wasn't exactly calm.
Not at all. There was this intense undercurrent of insecurity, bordering on paranoia, running through French society. And the army was put on this pedestal. It was seen as this sacred instrument, the tool for eventual revenge, la revanche.
Meaning its reputation had to be perfect, untouchable.
Absolutely beyond reproach. So the general staff, the military's high command, they were operating in this really volatile atmosphere where spy gains were expected, almost inevitable. And the army's image, its institutional honor, became more important than truth or justice.
A perfect storm waiting to happen.
Exactly. This intense paranoia created the perfect dark stage for the kind of catastrophic injustice we're about to unfold.
And the whole thing, this massive national crisis, it starts with something almost unbelievably mundane. Tell us about that first intercept.
Right. It begins on September 26, 1894.
Mm-hmm.
And the key player initially is a housekeeper, a woman named Marie Bastien.
Okay.
She worked at the German embassy in Paris. But she wasn't just a housekeeper. She was actually a double agent, secretly feeding information to the French counterintelligence unit, the Section de Statistique. Her handler, Major Hubert Joseph Henry, we'll be hearing his name again.
So she's essentially digging through the embassy's trash.
That was literally her job. Rooting through the wastepaper baskets, specifically targeting the office of the German military attaché, Colonel Maximilian von Schwarzkoppen. And on this particular day, she finds something. A handwritten note, torn up, in French.
The famous bordereau.
The bordereau. Once they pieced it back together, it was explosive. Even though the actual military secrets it contained were, relatively minor in the grand scheme of things.
What kind of secrets are we talking about?
It was a list, basically. 5 confidential French military items being offered to the Germans. Things like technical details about new field artillery components, specifically some specs for a hydraulic brake system and a new 120mm howitzer.
Okay, so not battle plans, but still sensitive. And the key thing was...
It proved definitively that there was a spy operating right inside the French general staff. Someone with high-level access was leaking secrets.
And the hunt begins. How did they narrow it down so fast?
Terrifyingly fast. Major Henry and his boss, Lieutenant Colonel Jean Sander, head of the section, they immediately focused the search because the intel was about advanced artillery.
They looked at artillery officers on the general staff.
Exactly. Officers who would have had access to that specific kind of technical information. And their eyes immediately fell on one man, Captain Alfred Dreyfus.
He fit the profile in terms of access?
He did. But let's be brutally honest, the real reason they zeroed in on him so quickly, it wasn't just about access. It was about something much uglier.
Prejudice.
Prejudice. Let's look at Dreyfus himself for a second. This guy was the absolute definition of a dedicated French patriot. Born in Mulhouse, Alsace, back in 1859. When Germany annexed Alsace after the war in 1871, his family chose to leave their home, move to Paris. That was a profound statement of loyalty to France.
And his military career?
Stellar. He went to the elite École Polytechnique, graduated ninth in his class from the really prestigious War College, the École Supérieure de Guerre, just the year before, in 1893. He had all the credentials.
Except one in their eyes.
Except one. He was the only Jewish officer serving on the general staff at that time. And the sources we have, they make it clear this prejudice wasn't just some vague feeling in the background. It was actually documented.
How so?
During his time at the War College, one of his evaluators, General Pierre de Bernafond, gave him top marks for technical skill, brilliant officer material. But then he tanked Dreyfus's overall score by giving him a 0 for likability.
0. That seems pointed.
It was. And Bernafond added this chilling little note. Jews were not desired on his staff.
Wow. Did Dreyfus just accept that?
No, he didn't. He actually lodged a formal protest against Bernafond's blatant bias at the time. He stood up for himself.
And that act of protesting bias
was twisted and weaponized against him later. The general staff spun his legitimate protests, his demand for fair treatment, as evidence of, quote, arrogance and insubordination. They painted it as proof of a potentially disloyal foreign nature. So when the bordereau landed on their desks, Sandher and Henry, already blinded by prejudice, they had their perfect, immediate, convenient scapegoat.
So they had their target. Now they needed proof, or at least something that looked like proof. The handwriting analysis.
Yes, the handwriting became the cornerstone of their case. But it was built on incredibly shaky ground right from the get-go.
Shaky how?
Well, Sandher pushed hard, insisting the handwriting on the bordereau matched samples of Dreyfus's writing. But the initial expert analysis, the professional assessment, actually contradicted him. 2 out of the first 3 examiners they consulted expressed serious doubts. They weren't convinced of this similarity at all.
But in that climate, doubt wasn't welcome.
Doubt was an obstacle. In that atmosphere of paranoia, the desperate need to protect the Army's image, those professional doubts were just swept aside. They needed certainty, or the appearance of it.
And they needed it fast, a quick conviction to show strength.
Exactly. Show the Republic they were dealing ruthlessly with treason. This rush to judgment really defined the whole interrogation process.
Which was conducted by Major Dupaty de Clem, right? On October 15th, 1894.
That's the date. The trap was set. Dreyfus was ordered to report to the Ministry of War, specifically told to wear civilian clothes, which was unusual, already a sign something was wrong. Petit de Clem, who fancied himself an amateur handwriting expert, led the interrogation. And the scene described in the sources, it's just chilling in its calculated cruelty.
How did they actually spring the trap?
Petit de Clem pretended he'd injured his right hand. So he asked Dreyfus, as a fellow officer, to take down a letter for him while he dictates.
And the letter contained?
The sentences Petit de Clem dictated were taken directly from the bordereau. The spy note. He watched Dreyfus like a hawk as he wrote.
Looking for any sign of recognition, a tremor, hesitation?
Exactly. But Dreyfus showed nothing. He just calmly transcribed the dictated sentences following orders. No sign he recognized the text, which of course an innocent man wouldn't. But a guilty man, realizing he was caught, you'd expect some reaction.
And his calmness, his lack of reaction was then used against him.
Perversely, yes. It wasn't seen as proof of innocence, but as proof of his iron nerve, his capacity for cool, calculated deceit. They were determined to read guilt into absolutely everything.
So what happened immediately after the dictation?
Petit de Clem dramatically slammed his hand down on the table, shouted, "In the name of the law, I arrest you for the crime of high treason." Dreyfus was completely stunned, bewildered, protesting his innocence. But it was too late. The die was cast.
And the trial itself, swift and secret.
Incredibly swift. After just 4 days, behind closed doors, a secret court-martial convicted Dreyfus of treason on December 22nd, 1894. Sentence: life imprisonment. But the military establishment wasn't done. They wanted to make a public spectacle.
The degradation ceremony, January 5th, 1895.
Yes, this was pure national theater, designed to stoke fury, solidify the verdict in the public mind, and serve as a warning. Our sources paint a vivid picture. Dreyfus marched onto the parade ground at the École Militaire. His epaulettes, the insignia of his rank, the stripes on his uniform, all systematically ripped off him.
Then his sword.
His sword, the ultimate symbol of his military honor, his service to France, was snapped in two before the crowd. It wasn't just punishment. It was a ritualistic stripping of his identity, his honor, public humiliation on a grand scale.
Designed to incite the crowd.
And it worked perfectly. The crowd, already whipped into a frenzy by the anti-Semitic press like Drumont's La Libre Parole, they just erupted. They hurled abuse, insults. But the most common cry, the one that really gets to the dark heart of the affair, was "Mort aux Juifs," death to the Jews.
Even as they destroyed his career and reputation.
He remained defiant. As they marched him away, his final words shouted out were an oath of innocence and loyalty. Vive la France! Vive l'armée! Long live France! Long live the army! Even as that army betrayed him.
This public spectacle had massive international repercussions too, didn't it? Through Theodor Herzl.
Yes, this is a crucial point. Herzl, the Hungarian journalist reporting for the Vienna newspaper, the New Freie Press, he was there. He witnessed the degradation ceremony.
And he initially believed Dreyfus was guilty.
He did, like many others. He trusted the military's judgment initially. But seeing that crowd, that raw, visceral, anti-Semitic hatred unleashed, it wasn't just about patriotism or anger at a supposed traitor. It was something deeper, uglier. It completely shattered Herzl's existing beliefs.
He wrote about it later, didn't he?
He did. In his diary later that year, he recorded this profound sense of despair. He recognized, and I'm quoting him here loosely, the emptiness and futility of trying to combat anti-Semitism within Europe.
He basically concluded that if this could happen in France, the birthplace of the revolution of equality, if a decorated, assimilated officer like Dreyfus could be destroyed purely because he was Jewish, then there was no real hope for Jewish people finding true acceptance or safety in Europe.
It was the absolute turning point for him, that public humiliation, that mob shouting, "Death to the Jews." It directly catalyzed his shift towards political Zionism. He decided the only solution was a sovereign Jewish homeland. So the Dreyfus affair didn't just rock France. It fundamentally altered the course of Jewish history.
While his case is literally changing the world, Dreyfus himself is shipped off to hell on earth, Devil's Island.
Off the coast of French Guiana. The conditions described are just unimaginable, utterly inhumane. He was kept in strict solitary confinement in this tiny isolated hut, completely cut off from any news, any communication about the storm raging back in France in his name.
And the physical conditions.
Brutal. Intense tropical heat, relentless swarms of insects, constant bouts of malaria, dysentery. It was designed to break him, physically and mentally, to ensure he died forgotten, taking the army's secret, their lie, to his grave. The sources clearly show a systematic effort by the state to destroy this man.
So Dreyfus is suffering in isolation, but back in France, the fight wasn't over. His family didn't give up.
No. Absolutely not. His older brother, Matthew Dreyfus, became this relentless force. He poured all his resources, all his energy into clearing Alfred's name. He filed appeal after appeal, presented evidence, but kept hitting this brick wall. The army was obsessed with its own infallibility. They wouldn't budge.
Rejections, time after time. But then a shift happens from within the military establishment itself.
Yes, this is where Lieutenant Colonel Marie-Georges Picard enters the story. In July 1895, Colonel Sandher, the initial head of intelligence who targeted Dreyfus, died. Picard succeeded him as head of the Section de Statistique.
Was Picard sympathetic to Dreyfus initially?
Not at all. By all accounts, he shared many of the typical anti-Semitic prejudices of his class and profession at the time. He wasn't a natural Dreyfusard, as they came to be called.
And his initial orders were actually to reinforce the case against Dreyfus.
Exactly. His superior, Assistant Chief Gauncey, specifically told him to dig up more incriminating evidence. The idea was to make the file so overwhelmingly damning that no court, no appeal could ever possibly overturn the conviction. They weren't looking for truth. They wanted ammunition to keep the lie buried.
But Picard was a professional intelligence officer.
And that's what made the difference. He was meticulous, trained in analysis. Whatever his personal prejudices, his professional duty drove him to investigate properly. He started digging into the files himself.
And he found something.
He did. In March 1896, his routine counter-espionage work intercepted another piece of communication. Not trash this time, but a type of telegram slip called a petit bleu. It was addressed to the German military attaché, Schwarzkoppen, clearly from someone still spying within the French general staff.
So the spy was still active even after Dreyfus was imprisoned.
Precisely. And crucially, Picard realized this petit bleu must have been sent by the actual author of the original bordereau. He compared the handwriting on this new message to the bordereau and other documents in the files. And it was an immediate match, not to Dreyfus's handwriting, which had always been a questionable fit, but to someone else's. The style was much more consistent, more precise.
Who was it? Who was the real spy?
Major Charles Marie Ferdinand Walson Esterhazy, another officer on the staff. But unlike Dreyfus, who was wealthy and dedicated, Esterhazy had this reputation. A known degenerate, constantly drowning in debt. He fit the classic profile of someone desperate enough to sell secrets for cash.
So the whole conspiracy started to unravel, at least for Pickard.
Absolutely. He tracked down Esterhazy, confronted him on April 6, 1896. And Esterhazy, realizing the game was up, confessed. He had admitted everything, Pickard.
So Pickard now has proof. Dreyfus is innocent. Esterhazy is the traitor. He reports this up the chain, right?
He does. He compiles a formal report, lays out the evidence, Esterhazy's confession, and recommends unequivocally that the Dreyfus case be re-examined immediately and that Esterhazy be arrested.
This must have sent shockwaves through the high command. The moment of truth for them. Justice or cover-up?
They chose cover-up. Without skipping a beat. Pickard's report, his demands for justice, they ran straight into what he later described as brick walls, erected by the Chief of Staff himself, General Boisdeffre, and Assistant Chief Gauntz. Their priority wasn't truth. It was protecting the Army's image. Admitting they'd framed an innocent man and convicted him, that would shatter public faith, humiliate the institution.
So they were willing to let a confessed traitor walk free and keep an innocent man on Devil's Island just to save face?
It's chilling. The depth of the cynicism is captured in this exchange, highlighted in our sources. Gauntz explicitly told Pickard, trying to bully him into silence. If you are silent, no one will know.
Just bury it.
Wow, what a test for Pickard. Remember, he wasn't predisposed to help Dreyfus. What did he do?
This is where Pickard becomes a truly heroic figure. He refused. He stood his ground. His reply has become legendary. "What you say is abominable," he told Gauntz. "I refuse to carry this secret to my tomb." That was the moment he crossed the line from investigator to whistleblower.
And the price for his integrity? Swift and brutal. The military machine turned on him instantly. He was discredited, smeared. Then came the transfers, always framed as in the interest of the service, of course. First to remote postings in the French Alps, then further and further away. Finally, effectively exiled, sent to command a regiment way out in Sousse, Tunisia, thousands of miles away. A clear attempt to silence him, bury him professionally, keep him far from Paris where he could expose the truth.
But silencing Pickard wasn't the end of it for the general staff. They needed to actively reinforce the lie.
Yes, the conspiracy moved from passive cover-up to active fabrication. Boisdeffre and Gauntz weren't satisfied just hiding the truth. They needed more evidence against Dreyfus. So they ordered Pickard's deputy, Major Henry, remember him, the trash intercept guy, to manufacture something.
To forge evidence.
Explicitly. They needed something to bolster the now shaky file, and Henry obliged. On November 1st, he produced what became infamous as the faux Henry the Henry forgery.
What was it supposed to be?
It was designed to look like incriminating correspondence between Dreyfus and the Germans. But it was a clumsy fake. Apparently, even when Henry and the generals showed this new proof to the Minister of War at the time, Jean-Baptiste Billot could see it was likely a forgery, probably made by Henry himself.
But he didn't expose it?
No, he went along with it. He agreed with the senior staff that, regardless of the truth, the conviction had to stand. The conspiracy now reached the political level.
Meanwhile, outside the military corridors, the case was splitting France in two.
Absolutely. The anti-Dreyfusards, a coalition of conservative nationalists, monarchists, and powerful elements within the Catholic clergy, they seized on the affair. They used it to resurrect centuries-old anti-Semitic tropes, arguing that Jews could never be truly loyal to France, that they were inherently foreign, treacherous.
And the press played a huge role.
A vile role in many cases.
Yeah.
Papers like Edouard Drumont's Le Libre Parole just became platforms for spewing hatred against Jews. But on the other side, the Dreyfusards were mobilizing. It was this incredible alliance. Socialists, anarchists, liberal intellectuals, artists. The conscience of the Republic waking up.
It literally divided families, friendships, even the art world.
Yeah, our sources mention that specifically. It split the Impressionists. You had Monet and Pissarro fiercely defending Dreyfus, while Degas and Renoir sided with the anti-Dreyfusards. It shows how deep this moral chasm ran through every single part of French society.
Despite all this growing public pressure and the high command knowing Esterhazy was the real spy, they went ahead with a trial for Esterhazy.
They did, but it was a complete sham. In January 1898, they put Esterhazy before a closed military court. The whole thing was orchestrated purely to exonerate him publicly and shut down the Dreyfusard campaign.
How did they manage that, given Picard's evidence?
They controlled the process. The Army brought in its own handwriting experts, who testified incredibly that Esterhazy's writing did not match the bordereau. They simply ignored or dismissed Picard's far more compelling findings.
And the verdict?
A joke. The court-martial deliberated for literally 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Then they acquitted Esterhazy. He walked out to cheers from the officers present. It was a blatant message. The army protects its own, even confessed traitors.
The public reaction must have been intense.
Violent. Dreyfusards protested the farce and were met with riots by anti-Dreyfusards in the streets. And what happened to the players? Esterhazy, the guilty spy, was quietly discharged, packed off to live comfortably in exile in England until 1923, possibly even with a secret army pension, while Pickard, the man who exposed the truth, he was immediately arrested for violation of professional secrecy and thrown in prison.
The guilty walks free, the innocent truth-teller is jailed. It's Kafkaesque.
It was that moment, that absolute inversion of justice, that finally pushed someone outside the system to act. 2 days after Esterhazy's acquittal, the novelist Émile Zola intervened.
With j'accuse.
IQs. The title itself, apparently suggested by the politician Georges Clemenceau, was like a thunderclap. It wasn't some polite opinion piece. It was a ferocious 4,500-word open letter splashed across the front page of the newspaper L'Aurore, addressed directly to the President of the Republic, Félix Faure.
And Zola held nothing back.
Nothing. He laid bare the entire conspiracy, the corruption, the framing of Dreyfus, the protection of Esterhazy, and crucially, he named names. He pointed the finger directly at the senior general staff members involved in the cover-up. He even accused the specific handwriting experts, Belhomme, Bernard, Bohr, of providing deliberately misleading fraudulent reports to ensure Dreyfus was convicted.
The impact must have been seismic.
Immediate and staggering. L'Aurore's circulation just exploded overnight. Went from around 30,000 copies to over 200,000. But the backlash from the anti-Dreyfusards was equally intense, so violent that Zola needed a constant police escort just to move around safely. His letter didn't just report on the division in France, it deepened it, forced everyone to take a side.
But Zola knew this would happen, right? This was a calculated move.
Absolutely. It was a brilliant, high-stakes gamble. Zola understood the military courts operated in secret, suppressing the real facts. The only way to force the truth into the open was to provoke the government into charging him with libel.
Turn his own trial into a public trial of the generals?
Precisely. He essentially dared them to sue him, and they took the bait. He was charged, tried, and convicted of defamation, sentenced to a year in prison, fined 3,000 francs. But strategically, he'd already won. Because during his defense, he managed to get all the suppressed facts, Pickard's evidence, the details of the cover-up, onto the public record. Having achieved that, he didn't wait to be imprisoned. He fled into exile in England. He'd lost the libel case legally. But politically, he'd turned defeat into this tide-turning victory. He finally smashed through the army's wall of silence.
Zola's public accusation put immense pressure on the government. The dam was cracking.
It was. But the final break, the complete collapse of the conspiracy, had to come from within the military structure itself, ironically enough.
Triggered by a new minister of war.
Yes, Godefroy Cavaignac. He took office in 1898, and initially he was actually an anti-Dreyfusard. He came in wanting to shut down the controversy, prove definitively that Dreyfus was guilty and that Zola and the Dreyfusards were wrong, maybe even treasonous themselves.
So he ordered a full review of the case files to build his argument.
Exactly. He wanted to marshal the evidence to crush the Dreyfusard campaign once and for all. But as he and his staff went through the secret file, he was apparently shocked to find just how much evidence pointing towards innocence had been deliberately withheld from Dreyfus's original defense team.
And the smoking gun was found almost by accident.
Through basic physical examination. On August 13, 1898, one of Cavaignac's staff officers, Captain Louis Couillet, was looking closely at that key piece of forged evidence, the faux Henry.
The document Henry had created to seal Dreyfus's fate.
The very one. Couillet held the document up to a bright lamp, and in that moment, the lie became physically visible. He noticed that the paper used for the header and footer of the document wasn't quite the same type, didn't have the same texture or watermark as the paper used for the main body of the text.
It was literally patched together, a demonstrable forgery.
Undeniable. The light exposed the lie. It was traced back immediately to its author, Major Henry, who by this point had been promoted to lieutenant colonel, partly as a reward for his service in the cover-up.
So Cavaignac calls Henry in.
On August 30th, with Generals Boisdeffre and Gons present, the pressure was immense. Cavaignac confronted Henry directly with the evidence of the forgery, and Henry, after about an hour of intense questioning, just broke. He confessed everything, admitted he'd fabricated the document, he was arrested on the spot and taken to Fort Mont-Valérien prison.
Henry's confession must have been the final blow to the Army's official story.
It shattered the wall of infallibility. The immediate consequences were huge. General Boisdeffre, the chief of staff, resigned immediately. So did General Gons. Cavaignac himself, the minister who had ordered the review, hoping to confirm Dreyfus's guilt, was also forced to resign shortly after, his position untenable. And Lucy Dreyfus, Alfred's wife, immediately petitioned for a formal judicial retrial based on this new evidence.
But the drama surrounding Henry wasn't over. It took another dark, mysterious turn.
Terribly dark. The very next day, August 31st, Henry was found dead in his prison cell. Official cause of death: suicide. His throat had been cut.
Suicide. But the sources mentioned something deeply suspicious about that.
Yes, a crucial, chilling detail that fuels speculation to this day. Our sources explicitly state, nobody found a straight razor on his person when he entered his cell.
So how did it get there? How does someone cut their own throat with a weapon they supposedly don't possess?
Exactly. Was it suicide with a smuggled weapon? Or was it murder, staged to look like suicide? It raises profound questions about who else might have been involved, who had the most to lose if Henry, known to crack under pressure, decided to reveal even more about the conspiracy.
Especially given the note he left behind.
Right, that cryptic note addressed to General Gantz. You know in whose interest I acted. Who is he referring to? Esterhazy. Or someone higher up, someone powerful enough to silence him permanently. The circumstances scream cover-up, potentially reaching far beyond just the army's reputation.
And how did the anti-Dreyfusards react to Henry's death and confession? Did it silence them?
Not for a second. They instantly pivoted. They declared Henry a national hero, a martyr who had sacrificed himself for the honor of France and the army.
A martyr for forging evidence.
It was a massive propaganda effort. Drumont's La Libre Parole launched the Henry Monument Fund, asking the public for donations to support Henry's widow. They raised a staggering amount, over 130,000 francs, and people used the subscription forms as a way to vent more bile, writing vicious anti-Semitic messages alongside their donations. The core lie was exposed, but the underlying hatred was still boiling.
And finally, Esterhazy.
Sensing the whole house of cards was collapsing, Esterhazy, safely in exile, finally admitted everything. Not just his own treason, but he also confirmed the High Command's active collusion in framing Dreyfus. There was no longer any plausible deniability. The path to a retrial was wide open.
Before we get to the retrial, let's just pause on that central piece of paper. The bordereau itself, it feels like a character in this drama.
It truly does. This one little document tore a nation apart. What did it actually look like? The sources describe it as this anonymous handwritten note, only about 30 lines long, originally found torn into 6 pieces.
On onion skin paper.
Yes. Thin, transparent onion skin paper, apparently with a faint grid pattern. It had to be painstakingly pieced back together. And because it was the absolute linchpin of the entire case and subjected to years, decades of scrutiny afterwards, it's genuinely been called the most analyzed document in the world.
And the focus on handwriting analysis during the affair was intense, involving dozens of experts over the years.
Over 40 experts from different countries eventually weighed in. And this led to this incredible clash, really, between genuine forensic science, or what passed for it then, and blatant pseudoscience driven by bias.
Embodied by one figure in particular, Alphonse Bertillon.
Alphonse Bertillon. He was the head of the Judicial Identification Service in Paris, famous for his system of anthropometric measurements, Bertillage. But he had zero, absolutely no formal training or expertise in graphology, in handwriting analysis. Yet he became the prosecution's star expert.
And his theory was?
Utterly bizarre. He became convinced that Dreyfus hadn't just written the bordereau, but had deliberately disguised his own handwriting using a complex system of self-forgery, even claiming Dreyfus had imitated his own brother's handwriting in parts.
How did he even attempt to justify that scientifically?
He didn't, not really. He invented this completely unique, impenetrable system. He created these incredibly complex, almost mystical diagrams. One was called the Citadel of Graphic Hieroglyphs. He talked about handwriting as an attack and defense between the letters. It was so convoluted, so dense with jargon, that it essentially baffled the court and defied any logical cross-examination. It gave his claims this false veneer of deep scientific authority.
It sounds completely mad. Wasn't there pushback?
There was. Even the president of France at the time, Casimir Perier, reportedly said of Bertillon, he is completely mad, with an absurd and Kabbalistic madness. It's a perfect example of how someone could use obscure, pseudo-academic language to push a predetermined conclusion, basically dressing up prejudice as science.
But surely not all the experts were like Bertillon. You mentioned earlier some had doubts initially.
Absolutely. We need to remember the initial independent experts consulted back in 1894. People like Alfred Gobert, the expert from the Bank of France, and Eugène Pelletier from the Paris Court of Appeal. They both stated pretty clearly back then that the handwriting was not Dreyfus's.
But Bertillon's influence won out.
Yes, Bertillon's prestige, combined with the pressure from the military, swayed things. He was supported by another expert, Pierre Tessonnière, and crucially, by Étienne Charvet. Charvet was this well-respected autograph collector and expert. He initially sided with Bertillon, and his support gave Bertillon's claims credibility. He seems to have been influenced after meeting Bertillon.
But Charvet had a change of heart later, a moment of professional conscience.
A huge moment. During the 1899 retrial at Rennes, Charvet did something incredibly brave. He publicly retracted his 1894 testimony. He stood up in court, faced Dreyfus, and admitted his mistake. He said something like, "I now recognize my error. It is a great relief to my conscience to declare that I was wrong in 1894.
That takes guts. To admit error on such a public stage, knowing the political implications.
Extraordinary professional ethics. And he wasn't alone in challenging Bertillon's nonsense by then. A whole group of actual scientists and scholars stepped up.
Who were they?
An extraordinary group, the sources call them. People like Dr. Louis Frank, the jurist Paul Morio from the University of Geneva, and maybe most famously, the distinguished mathematician Paul Painlevé. They used rigorous logic and scientific principles to dismantle Bertillon's theories.
What was their conclusion?
Categorical. Morio stated flatly that every word on the bordereau matched Esterhazy's known handwriting. Painlevé basically argued that Bertillon's convoluted theories were baseless and couldn't possibly convince any impartial person with a solid scientific education. The intellectual community was pushing back hard against the Army's house of cards.
So the scientific case against Dreyfus had crumbled. Henry confessed to forgery. Esterhazy confessed to treason. The path seems clear for exoneration.
You would think so. But the end of this affair was still agonizingly prolonged and painful. The Supreme Court did overturn the original 1894 conviction on June 3, 1899. Dreyfus was finally brought back from Devil's Island.
After 5 years in hell.
5 years. Physically wrecked, mentally scarred, having endured unimaginable isolation, knowing almost nothing about the global firestorm his case had ignited.
And he was finally free.
No. Incredibly, as soon as he set foot back in France, he was arrested again. Immediately imprisoned at Rennes to face a second court-martial, which started in August 1899.
Why? On what grounds?
The Army leadership, particularly General Mercier, who had been Minister of War during the first trial, was still desperately trying to salvage the original guilty verdict. The atmosphere at Rennes was toxic, intensely hostile towards Dreyfus and his supporters.
And the danger wasn't just legal, it was physical too.
Yes. Underscoring the volatility, Dreyfus's main lawyer, the prominent Fernand Laborie, was shot in the back by an unknown assailant on August 14th, right in the middle of the trial preparation. He survived, but it showed this wasn't just a courtroom battle. It was bordering on civil war.
So what was the verdict of this second court-martial, given all the new evidence?
The verdict, delivered on September 9, 1899, is one of the most bizarre and logically incoherent decisions imaginable. 5 out of the 7 military judges voted to uphold the guilty verdict, but they added a qualifier, with extenuating circumstances.
Extenuating circumstances for high treason? How does that even make sense? You can't be a little bit treasonous.
Exactly. It's utterly absurd. It was a blatant political compromise. It acknowledged the weakness of the evidence, perhaps, but refused to admit the Army had been fundamentally wrong. It reduced the sentence to 10 years, but kept the stain of treason legally attached to Dreyfus. It allowed the generals to claim they defended the Army's honor while appearing merciful.
How was this received?
With outrage internationally. Protest marches erupted in 20 foreign capitals. The French government, facing this condemnation and desperate to put the whole divisive affair behind them, especially with the huge Paris Universal Exhibition coming up in 1900, they looked for a way out.
A pardon?
President Waldeck Rousseau offered Dreyfus a presidential pardon on September 19th.
Did Dreyfus accept?
He did. He was utterly broken, exhausted after everything he'd been through. He accepted the pardon to gain his freedom, but legally, accepting a pardon implies guilt. So while he was free, the verdict stood. His supporters, people like the socialist leader Jean Jaurès, were deeply unsatisfied. The fight for full legal exoneration had to continue.
Tragically, Émile Zola didn't live to see that final victory.
No. On September 29, 1902, Zola died in his home, officially from asphyxiation due to a blocked chimney carbon monoxide poisoning, ruled an accident.
But there were always suspicions.
Always. Given the enemies he'd made, the timing, it seemed too convenient for some. And those suspicions gained significant weight decades later. Our sources mention a confession published in the newspaper Liberation in 1953. A Parisian roofer claimed, on his deathbed, that he had been paid to deliberately block Zola's chimney that night.
So, likely murder linked directly to the affair.
It strongly suggests Zola was silenced by the same dark forces that had operated throughout the Dreyfus conspiracy. But even murder couldn't stop the momentum for truth by then. The case was investigated yet again in 1903.
And finally,
On July 13, 1906, 12 long years after his initial arrest, the French Supreme Court of Appeal completely annulled the 1899 Rennes verdict. They declared Dreyfus legally and definitively innocent. This wasn't a pardon. It was a full clearing of his name, acknowledging the original trials were based on fraud and forgery.
justice, finally. Late, but complete.
Dreyfus was reinstated in the army, promoted to major, his seniority restored. He was made a Chevalier de la Légion d'honneur in the same courtyard where he'd been publicly degraded years earlier.
And Picard, the whistleblower.
Georges Picard was also fully exonerated, promoted to brigadier general. And in a moment of supreme historical irony, he went on to serve as France's Minister of War from 1906 to 1909, leading the very institution that had tried to destroy him.
And Dreyfus himself, did he just fade away?
Not entirely. He gave one last profound answer to those who questioned his loyalty. When World War I erupted in 1914,
He went back to serve.
yes, at 55 years old, he voluntarily returned to active duty. He fought bravely on the Western Front, serving in major battles like Chemin des Dames and Verdun. He received further honors for his service before the war ended. It was the definitive rebuttal, written in service and sacrifice, to the lies about his patriotism. Tragically, 2 of his nephews were killed fighting for France during the war, further underscoring his family's deep loyalty.
The affair officially ended in 1906, but its shadow stretched long after Dreyfus's death in 1935. It fundamentally reshaped France.
Massively. It was this huge societal reckoning. It exposed these deep, seemingly irreconcilable divisions between the Republic and its ideals and the reactionary forces of nationalism, militarism, and anti-Semitism, often tied to the army and parts of the Catholic Church.
And the outcome favored the Republic.
Ultimately, yes. The Dreyfusards won the political battle. It led directly to the 1905 law that formally separated church and state in France, a cornerstone of French secularism, laïcité, ever since.
But it also left a darker legacy, a blueprint for future conflicts.
Definitely. Those two psyches of France, as some historians put it, the progressive Republican side versus the reactionary authoritarian, often anti-Semitic side, they didn't disappear. You see echoes of that division recurring throughout 20th century French history, for instance, in the figures of Charles de Gaulle versus Pierre Laval during World War II.
And the anti-Dreyfusards, the ideology they represented.
Their failure in 1906 didn't make them vanish. That virulent strain of nationalism and anti-Semitism went underground, festered, and it provided the ideological groundwork, the dark political inheritance, for the French collaborators who worked with the Nazis during the Vichy regime in World War II. It's a chilling lineage. The Dreyfus affair wasn't just a moment, it was a wound that continued to shape France's future.
So after tracing this incredibly complex, decades-long saga, betrayal, conspiracy, lies, but also courage and eventual redemption, what are the key things you, the listener, should take away from this deep dive?
I think the core lesson really isn't just about Alfred Dreyfus, the innocent man. It's about the terrifying vulnerability of justice itself when powerful institutions decide that protecting their own image, their own self-preservation, is more important than the truth.
It shows how easily the system can be corrupted.
Exactly. The military, the courts, even parts of the government, they all became weaponized. And that slide into injustice was greased by this rampant, unchallenged structural prejudice anti-Semitism that allowed them to pick their target and ignore the facts. It makes you seriously question any institution that claims infallibility.
The damage wasn't just to one man, but to the Republic itself. It reminds me of that quote from Georges Clemenceau, who played such a key role.
Clemenceau really nailed the profound irony, the deep betrayal at the heart of it all. He looked back at the French Revolution, the ideals it stood for.
And he said, "What irony is this, that men should have stormed the Bastille, only to discover in the end that it had become impossible to get a man tried in accordance with the law."
That's the crux of it. The ultimate betrayal wasn't just about leaking minor military secrets in the bordereau. The real profound betrayal was against the very founding principles of the French Republic: liberty, equality, fraternity. The Dreyfus affair stands as this permanent, chilling warning. Even societies built on Enlightenment ideals can plunge into darkness if prejudice is allowed to fester and institutions prioritize secrecy over truth.
Okay, so we hope you liked our today's discussion. For more such discussions, subscribe to our channel, Phantom Homicide.